Big shift. Airbnb alert. Must see.
It's sunny. It's sunny in Van.
Welcome everyone. It's Sunny in Van, where Vancouver real estate truly shines. On this episode, we're going to be looking at Airbnb short-term rentals. But before we get into the episode, disclaimer alert, the content and information on this channel is for educational and informational purposes only. This is not financial or professional advice. With that being said, let's get on with the show. Hey everyone, I am on the news.gov.bc.ca and they're talking about the short term rentals and Airbnb among other companies. So let's get right to this. Legislation introduced to rein in short term rentals deliver more homes for people, turning short term rentals back into long term homes for people. Turning short term rentals into homes for people is at the core of newly introduced legislation to regulate the rapidly expanding short term rental market. Anyone who's looking for an affordable place to live knows how hard it is, and short term rentals are making it even more challenging, said Premier David Eby. The number of short term rentals in BC has ballooned in recent years, removing thousands of long term homes from the market. That's why we're taking strong action to rein in profit driven mini hotel operators, create new enforcement tools, and return homes to the people who need them. Short term rental listings on online platforms, which may include, for example, Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, Flipkey, have expanded rapidly over recent years. Data shows that it continues to surge since the COVID-19 pandemic. BC's short-term rental market is now at an all-time high, diverting thousands of long-term rental homes onto the short-term market. Currently, there are approximately 28,000 daily active short-term rental listings in BC, an increase of 20% from a year ago. Data indicates that more than 16,000 entire homes are being listed as short-term rentals for the majority of a calendar year. The short-term rental market has created serious challenges in BC and around the world, said Ravi Kalon, Minister of Housing. Operators with multiple listings are taking homes off the long-term market to make big profits while people pay the price. It can't go on like this. The legislation is comprehensive and designed to target areas with high housing needs. Its strong action and thoughtful approach to tackle the growing short-term rental challenge and deliver more homes for people. The short-term rental market in BC is dominated by a small segment of profit-driven operators. Research from McGill University shows the top 10% of hosts earn nearly half of all revenue. Nearly half of all operators have multiple listings. Approximately 30 municipalities, including Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna, have introduced short-term rental bylaws and license fees to regulate the short-term rental market. The proposed legislation builds on those bylaws and equips municipalities with more enforcement tools. The legislation focuses on three key areas: increasing fines and strengthening tools for local governments, returning more short term rentals to long term homes, and establishing provincial rules and enforcement. Changes to how short term rentals operate will come into effect through a phased in approach and will include increasing fines and better tools for local governments, increasing fines for operators breaking local rules to support local municipal bylaws, and requiring short-term rental platforms to share data to strengthen local enforcement. Requiring online short-term rental platforms to share their data with the province so the province can provide that information to local governments for enforcement and support of provincial and federal tax auditing. Requiring short-term rental platforms to include businesses' license numbers on listings where they are used by local government and to remove listings without them quickly to ensure local rules are being followed. And giving regional districts the ability to issue business licenses so they can more effectively regulate short-term rentals in rural areas. Returning more short-term rentals into long-term homes for people, requiring short-term rentals in BC to be offered only in the principal residence of a host in municipalities with a population of 10,000 people or more. Principal residence plus one secondary suite or laneway home/garden suite on the property is allowed. Forthcoming regulations will specify areas exempt from the principal residence requirement, including 14 resort regions, mountain resort areas, municipalities under 10,000 population, except those within 15 kilometers to larger municipalities and regional district electoral areas, and removing legal non-conforming use protections for short-term rentals being taken advantage of by investors to support local governments' efforts to set rules about where these units can operate in communities. Establishing provincial rules and enforcement. Establishing a provincial host and platform registry by late 2024 for stronger accountability, and launching a provincial short-term rental compliance and enforcement unit to make sure rules are being followed. Updating how short-term rentals are operated and enforced will contribute to thousands of homes being returned to the market over the next few years, while giving smaller communities and communities that are heavily reliant on short-term rental-related tourism some flexibility. These areas will be able to choose to opt into the principal residence requirements depending on housing pressures in their communities. Communities on the First Nation reserve land will be exempt from the legislation. Modern treaty nations will also be exempt from the legislation, but will be able to opt into the legislation if desired. This proposed legislation will not apply to hotels and motels. Regulations are also being drafted to exempt additional types of properties. For example, timeshares and fishing lodges, which are not intended to be covered into the scope of the legislation. This legislation is part of province's Homes for People's Action Plan, announced in spring 2023. The plan builds on historic action to deliver housing since 2017 and sets out further actions to deliver the homes people need faster, while creating more vibrant communities throughout BC. All right, there is a section that we're going to cover. This section starts off with facts about short-term rentals in BC. At least 30 municipalities in BC have introduced bylaws and license fees to manage the growing need for regulation of short-term rentals, municipal short-term rental bylaws or license fees. These bylaws range in levels of restrictions and rules towards hosting short-term rentals and demonstrate the need for a whole of province approach. Many of those bylaws stipulate some form of principal residence requirement, like in Vancouver and Victoria, but some municipalities are lacking the tools, data, and ability to enforce the bylaws. In Vancouver, city data shows more than 30% of hosts are operating illegally. Wow. In Victoria, approximately 1,600 hosts are operating under the legal non-conforming clause, which prohibits city bylaws from applying to certain buildings and homes. City records also show that 42% of short-term rental licenses are held by operators who live out of town. In Kelowna, there are nearly 1,200 short-term rental accommodations with a valid business license, an increase of 89% since 2020. Data, however, indicates nearly 2,400 unique properties across 74 different short-term rental platforms may be offering short-term rental accommodation. In the District of Squamish, city reports show short-term rental units have increased 38% from 2021 to 2022, and less than half of the operating short-term rentals are compliant with the regulations. Based on business license counts from a sample of 50 municipalities, the province estimates that the percentage of non-compliant short-term rental listings in 2023 is about 40 to 50%. Short-term rentals are increasingly seen as contributing to global housing challenges, and in response, jurisdictions around the world are increasingly taking action to regulate, restrict, or ban short-term rentals of units, in particular short-term rental of units that could otherwise be providing long-term housing. Proposed short-term rental legislation to increase housing in BC. New legislation and enforcement tools will improve how short-term rentals can operate in BC. These changes establish minimum requirements for local governments, which may choose to enact further restrictions. The changes will include increasing fines and better tools for local governments. Municipal Ticket Information System, also referred to as MTI or municipal ticketing. Fines that can be levied by local governments are expected to increase from $1,000 to $3,000, which can impose per infraction per day. The Local Government Act will also amend to increase the maximum penalty that can be levied by regional districts from a maximum of $2,000 up to a maximum of $50,000 for prosecutions under the Offense Act. Short-term rental platforms will be required to provide data to the province relating to their host listings, which will be shared with local governments to help them enforce compliance and used to support tax auditing. Platforms will have to remove a host listing within a few days when there is no valid local government business license or provincial registration in place. Regional districts will be given the ability to issue business licenses to regulate short-term rentals more effectively in rural areas. Returning more short-term rentals into long-term homes for people requires short-term rentals to be offered only in the principal residence of a host in a municipality with a population of 10,000 people or more. Principal residence plus one additional unit, secondary suite, or laneway home/garden on the property is allowed. The following communities will be exempt from the principal residence requirement through regulations, but can opt in if the local government decides to do so. Most municipalities with a population under 10,000 people, except those immediately adjacent to larger municipalities with the principal residence requirement, example Highlands, Belcarra. The 14 resort communities in Mountain Resorts area, Whistler, and Sun Peaks, and all regional district areas. The regulations will tend to specify a process where larger communities, population of 10,000 people or more, that are covered by the principal residence requirement, but which have a vacancy rate above 3%, can be requested to opt out. A full list of municipalities that are subject to the principal residence requirement is in Backgrounder 4. If you want to check that list out, it is fairly big. Establishing provincial rules and enforcement, requiring mandatory participation in a provincial host and platform registry to be established by late 2024. Short-term rental listings will need to include host, local government business license, number, and when launched, a provincial registry number. Launching a provincial short-term rental compliance and enforcement unit to make sure rules are being followed. The provincial unit will track compliance, issue orders, and administer penalties for violations. Requirements to share data with the province to improve enforcement efforts and the requirements to remove listings not following local and provincial rules will only apply online platforms that book and receive payments for a short-term stay. To ensure short-term rentals hosts are following rules, the requirement to register listings and principal residence requirement will apply to all advertised short-term rental listings. Timeline of legislation. The proposed legislation and company regulations will come into effect in a phased-in approach. Phase 1. Increasing fines. Immediately after the legislation is passed and receives royal assent. Fines. Forthcoming regulations are intended to increase fines under the Municipal Ticketing Information (MTI) system in the Community Charter and Vancouver Charter bylaw enforcement ticket regulations from $1,000 to $3,000 per infraction per day. Increase to maximum fine. Regional districts can set for prosecutions of bylaw offenses to $50,000, consistent with the maximum fine for municipalities under the Community Charter. Regional districts. Amend the Local Government Act to provide regional districts with authority to create businesses licenses for short-term rentals. Phase 2. Releasing short-term rental units to long-term use. May 1st, 2024. Enacting the principal residence requirement. Require short-term rentals to be provided in the principal residence of a host only, plus one secondary suite or laneway home/garden suite on the property in communities with a population over 10,000 people. Removing legal non-conforming use clause. Remove legacy protections of non-conforming use of property in the Local Government Act and Vancouver Charter so they do not apply to short-term rentals. Phase 3. Introducing platform accountability measures summer 2024. Requiring that short-term rental platform include businesses' license numbers on listings where they are used by a local government, and to remove listings without them quickly to ensure local rules are being followed. Requiring platforms to provide certain information about listings to the province on a regular basis and allow the province to share information with the local governments to support bylaw enforcement. Phase 4. Creating provincial oversight. Late 2024. Creating a registry and requiring all short-term rental hosts to register short-term rental properties and require platforms to register their business operations within the province. Thank you so much for watching today's video and staying till the end. If you have any questions about short-term rentals, Airbnb, or looking for additional information on your real estate journey, feel free to contact us. All of our information is in the description below. With that being said, Sunny out.